Welcome back to Herd to Harvest. If you have ever stood on your land, looked out across a pasture or a patch of scrubby woods, and imagined a big, deep pond sparkling in the sun right there, you are not alone. A pond is one of those homestead dreams that seems almost impossibly big. You picture the livestock drinking from the edge, the kids swimming in the summer, the fish rising to the surface in the evening, and the whole ecosystem just humming with life. But then, the practical side kicks in, and you start looking at excavation quotes, and your heart sinks. Tens of thousands of dollars for a crew to come in with massive machines and do the work. For a lot of us, that number puts the dream firmly out of reach. But what if I told you that you can dig a deep, substantial one-acre pond with cheap equipment? Not toy equipment, not just a shovel and a wheelbarrow, although that's where all great projects start. I'm talking about rented machines, borrowed tractors, and a whole lot of sweat equity, all of which can bring a one-acre pond into your reality for a fraction of what the professionals charge. Today, I'm going to walk you through exactly how we did it, step by step, so you can see what's involved, what it costs, and whether this might be the year you finally bring that shimmering water to your land. Before we even touch a machine, we have to talk about planning. A deep one-acre pond is a significant earthwork, and if you get the planning wrong, no amount of digging will fix it. The first thing you need to understand is your watershed. A pond is simply a hole in the ground that intercepts water flowing through the landscape. It can be fed by surface runoff, by a seasonal stream, by groundwater, or by a combination. On a one-acre scale, unless you have a spring or a year-round creek, you are most likely building what's called an excavated pond, which is just a big, deep hole that catches rainwater and runoff from the surrounding land. The key is to place it at a low point where water naturally flows, or where you can divert a swale or a small drainage into it. Deep is a relative term, but for a pond that will stay cool in summer, support fish through winter, and not fill up with algae every August, you want a significant portion of it to be at least 10 to 12 feet deep. Ideally, you want some areas that are 15 feet or deeper. That depth keeps the water temperature stable, prevents winter kill of fish, and limits the growth of rooted aquatic weeds because light can't reach the bottom. A one-acre pond with an average depth of 10 feet holds about 3.25 million gallons of water. That's a serious resource. Now, you need to check your local regulations. Many counties require permits for any pond over a certain size, especially if it involves digging below the water table or altering a watercourse. Call your local soil and water conservation district or the county planning office. They're often incredibly helpful and will tell you exactly what you need. Do not skip this step. The last thing you want is to spend weeks digging a beautiful pond and then be told you have to fill it back in. Once you have your site chosen and your permits in hand, there is one more crucial step before you fire up any engine. You need to know what's under your feet. Soil type is everything when it comes to holding water. Dig a few test pits with a shovel or a post hole digger, going down at least 4 or 5 feet. What are you hitting? If you have heavy clay, celebrate. That's pond gold. If you have sand, gravel, or fractured rock, you're going to need a liner strategy, and you need to plan for that from the start. You can also do a simple percolation test. Dig a hole, fill it with water, and see how fast it drains. If it drops less than an inch an hour, you have fairly impermeable soil. If it drains like a bathtub with the plug pulled, you have work to do. Knowing your soil before you commit to the full dig saves you from the heartbreak of a beautifully shaped hole that never holds water. This is the kind of step that professional contractors charge to do, but you can do it yourself with nothing more than a shovel, a bucket, and a tape measure. Now it's time to talk equipment. This is the cheap part relative to hiring a professional crew. The machine you need is an excavator. Not a little mini excavator for digging footings, but a decent-sized machine. Something in the 20 to 30 metric ton range. That sounds huge, but you can rent one for a week or two from a heavy equipment yard. A 20-ton excavator has a bucket big enough to move serious earth, and it has the reach to dig down to 15 feet and still pile the spoil far enough away from the edge. Weekly rental rates vary by region, but you can often get a machine delivered for a few $1,000s. It's a big expense, but it's a fraction of what a contractor charges to do the same work because you're not paying for an operator, a site foreman, or their profit margin. If you have experience running heavy equipment, you can operate it yourself. If you don't and you want to learn, many rental yards offer basic training, or you can hire an experienced operator for the hour just to run the machine while you direct the work. Even paying a skilled operator for a few days is far cheaper than a turnkey pond building contract. I also want to tell you about the secret weapon we used. A neighbor, an older gentleman down the road who had spent his life on dozers and scrapers. He charged us a modest hourly rate and coffee, and he brought decades of instinct to the dig. He could look at the cut and know exactly where the water would pool, where the bank would slump, where to put the overflow pipe. If you have someone like that in your community, reach out. The knowledge of an old operator is priceless, and they often love sharing it.
Another cheap equipment option is to look for a neighbor with a big farm tractor and a rear-mounted dirt scraper or a box blade. For a 1-acre pond, a tractor alone wouldn't dig deep enough, but it can be used for the initial topsoil stripping and for moving the spoil piles once the excavator has done the deep digging. You can often borrow or rent a tractor for a fraction of the cost of an excavator. The ideal setup is a combination, an excavator for the deep hole and a tractor with a scraper for moving and spreading the spoils. Let's get to the actual digging process. The first step is to strip the topsoil from the entire footprint of the pond, plus a generous margin around the edge. Topsoil is black gold, full of organic matter and seeds. You do not want it in the bottom of your pond. It will cause water quality problems, and it's a waste of good soil. Use a bulldozer or a tractor with a front-end loader to peel off the top 6 to 12 inches of soil and stockpile it separately. You will use this later to cover the spoil piles or to dress the finished banks. With the topsoil safely aside, you begin the deep excavation. If you're using an excavator, position it on the high side of the pond and start at the far end, working your way back. This way, you are always digging in front of you and piling the spoil behind you, and the machine never gets trapped in the hole. As you dig, you need to think about the underwater topography you are creating. A deep pond should not have steep vertical sides. That's a safety hazard, and it makes it hard for plants and animals to access the water. You want a gradual slope from the edge down to about 3 feet deep, then a steeper drop-off to the deep hole. This creates a shallow shelf around the perimeter where aquatic plants can grow, where frogs and dragonflies can hang out, and where a person or an animal that falls in can climb out. The deep central basin should have gently sloping sides too. A ratio of 3:1, meaning 3 feet of horizontal run for every 1 foot of vertical drop, is a stable slope for most soil types. If your soil is sandy or loose, you may need an even gentler slope. If you have good clay, you can get away with a bit steeper. The point is to avoid a situation where the sides slump into the pond a year after you build it. As you dig, you are going to generate an enormous amount of spoil. A 1-acre pond, 10 feet deep, produces over 16,000 cubic yards of soil. That is a mountain. You need a plan for it before you start. The most useful thing you can do with the spoil is to build a berm around the low side of the pond. The berm serves 2 purposes. It raises the water level by acting as a dam on the downhill side, and it creates a windbreak and a visual screen. You can also use the spoil to fill low spots in your pasture, to build raised garden beds, or to create a gentle slope up to the house or barn. The worst thing you can do is just leave a massive pile next to the pond that you have to look at for the rest of your life. Have a plan and move the spoil as you dig. Here's where the cheap equipment approach really shines. With an excavator, you can pile the spoil within reach. Then, in the evenings or on weekends, you can use a smaller tractor or even a skid steer with a bucket to shuttle that spoil to where it needs to go. You don't have to do it all in one go. You can chip away at the spoil mountain over the course of a few months after the pond is dug. The initial excavation shapes the hole. The cleanup shapes the land around it. Now, a deep hole in the ground does not automatically hold water. The soil at the bottom of your pond must be relatively impermeable. This is where soil type matters enormously. If you're blessed with heavy clay, you're in luck. As you dig, you can use the clay from the deepest layers to line the bottom and sides, a process called compacted clay lining. You spread a layer of moist clay 6 to 12 inches thick over the entire basin and compact it with a sheep's foot roller, which is a heavy drum with protruding feet that knead the clay into a dense, watertight seal. Many excavation rental yards also rent sheep's foot rollers, and you can pull them with a tractor. This is the critical step that turns a dry hole into a pond.
If your soil is sandy or gravelly and you don't have access to good clay, you have a few cheap options. One is to import bentonite clay. Bentonite is naturally occurring volcanic clay that swells to many times its dry volume when it gets wet, forming an impermeable gel. You can spread dry bentonite granules over the pond basin, mix it into the top few inches of soil with a disc harrow, and then compact it. It's not super cheap, but it's far cheaper than a synthetic liner for a 1-acre pond. A second, even more old-fashioned method is glaying. You spread a layer of fresh animal manure, straw, and compost over the pond basin, fill it with a bit of water, and let the anaerobic bacteria seal the soil pores with their slime. It sounds strange, but it works, and it costs next to nothing if you have livestock. One mistake we made early on, and I'm going to save you from it, was underestimating the role of trees. We had a beautiful old willow on the edge of the planned pond footprint, and we thought it would be lovely shading the water. What we didn't account for was that willow roots seek water aggressively. Within 2 years, those roots were probing through our compacted clay layer, creating tiny channels for water to escape. We had to make the hard decision to remove the tree and recompact the liner in that area. If you have trees within 50 feet of the pond edge, especially water-loving species like willow, poplar, or silver maple, you need to think carefully. Either site the pond away from them or be prepared to remove them to protect the seal. It's a hard lesson, but a pond is a long-term investment, and tree roots are relentless. Once your liner or clay seal is in place, you need to protect it from drying out and cracking before the pond fills. If you are relying on rainwater to fill the pond, it might take a long time. You can speed up the filling by diverting roof runoff from your barn or house into the pond. A series of buried gutters or a simple swale can capture thousands of gallons from a single good rainstorm. In our case, we got lucky with a wet spring and the pond filled to the overflow pipe within a couple of months. The overflow is another important detail. You need a pipe near the top of the berm set at your desired maximum water level that carries excess water safely away to a drainage ditch or a swale so that the berm never gets overtopped and eroded. Once the water starts to rise, something magical happens. The pond becomes the heart of the homestead. Almost immediately, wildlife finds it. Dragonflies lay their eggs, water beetles row across the surface, and within weeks the sound of frogs fills the evening air. For the herd part of Herd to Harvest, a deep pond is an absolute game changer. You can fence off a drinking access point with a gentle gravel ramp, and your herd of cattle, sheep, or goats will have clean, fresh water year-round. You don't have to haul hoses, break ice in frozen troughs, or worry about pumps failing. The pond is gravity-fed by the landscape itself. I remember the first time I saw our small herd of cattle walk down to the pond on a hot August afternoon. They had been drinking from a stock tank that needed filling every few days, and the water always got warm and stale. When they found the pond, they waded in up to their bellies, dunked their muzzles, and drank that deep, cool water like it was the finest thing they had ever tasted. From that moment on, I never had to worry about them going thirsty. The pond did the work for me. That is the kind of self-sufficiency we're chasing on Herd to Harvest. For harvest, the pond is equally vital. A deep pond can be stocked with fish. Bluegill, catfish, and bass form a self-sustaining food chain that provides protein for the table with almost no input from you. You can plant the shallow edges with edible and medicinal aquatic plants like watercress, arrowhead, and cattail. The pond water can be used for irrigation, pumped out with a solar-powered pump or a small gas pump to water your vegetable gardens and fruit trees during dry spells. The nutrients in the pond water are an added fertilizer, the result of leaves, fish waste, and the endless cycling of life. I want to pause here and talk about the deep part of the title. A deep pond is dramatically different from a shallow dugout. A shallow pond warms fast, which leads to algae blooms, low oxygen, and winter kill of fish. A deep pond with its cold, dark bottom stays stratified.
The cold water holds more oxygen, and the depth provides a refuge for fish in both summer heat and winter ice. When you're digging, it's tempting to stop once you have a big enough hole to hold water, but every foot of depth you add increases the pond's resilience and its ecological stability. If you're going to all this effort, dig deep. It is the single best investment in the long-term health of the pond.
Safety is the last thing I want to cover, and I take it very seriously. A deep pond is a beautiful feature, but it is also a hazard if you don't design it carefully. The shallow shelf around the edge, the one I mentioned for plants and wildlife, is also a critical safety feature. It means that if someone slips into the water, they can stand up and walk out instead of being trapped against the steep, slippery bank. If you have children or grandchildren on the homestead, the pond needs to be either fenced or clearly visible from the house. Teach water safety, but also design safety into the structure itself. A gentle entry slope, a clearly marked deep area, and a stable bank that doesn't collapse underfoot are all part of responsible pond ownership. Building our deep one-acre pond with cheap rented equipment was one of the hardest things I have ever done on this land, and also one of the most rewarding. There were days when I was covered in mud up to my knees, running a machine that felt like it might tip over at any moment, wondering what on earth I had gotten myself into. But then the water came, and the frogs came, and the first time I caught a fat bluegill and fried it up for dinner, everything felt worth it. That pond now waters the cattle, irrigates the garden, feeds the family, and provides a place of quiet, shimmering peace at the end of a long day. If you are sitting on a piece of land with a low spot that always seems to hold a puddle longer than anywhere else, or a seasonal drainage that rushes with water in the spring and dries up by July, I want you to think about what a deep pond could do for your homestead. It is a big project, yes, but with a rented excavator, a borrowed tractor, and a clear plan, it is within your reach. It doesn't require a contractor. It doesn't require a second mortgage. It requires the willingness to learn, to make some noise and some dust, and to shape the land with your own two hands. Thank you for spending this time with me on Herd to Harvest. If this pond building journey sparked a little fire, hit that thumbs up so other homesteaders can find it. And if you are not subscribed yet, come join our community of practical, hands-on folks who are building abundant, sustainable lives from the land. Now I'm going to check the water level. I'll see you in the next one.